Every single morning, the HOA president drove straight across my front lawn like it was a public road. I'm standing at my kitchen window with my morning coffee, watching her white Mercedes barrel through like she owns the place. Sprinklers crushed under her tires, deep ruts carved through the fresh sod I'd spent weekends laying by hand. Mud and debris sprayed across the flower bed my wife planted before she passed away, our last project together. And every single time she did it, she smiled and waved. When I confronted her, she rolled down the window. "Relax. HOA access. You can't stop it." The next day, a violation notice hit my door. $1,200 fine for obstructing community transit on my own property. That's when this stopped being about grass and became about control. So I stopped arguing, stopped complaining, and quietly changed something underneath her favorite shortcut. The next time her Mercedes used my yard, it found out who really owned the ground. Drop your location and your craziest neighbor story below. Let me tell you about Cheryl Brennan, because understanding your enemy is half the battle. Picture a woman who treats a homeowners association like her personal kingdom. Real estate agent by day, neighborhood dictator by night. She's got the kind of smile that says, "I'm helping you," while she's picking your pocket. Drives that white Mercedes with HOA Queen vanity plates. Yeah, she actually thought that was clever. Cheryl lives 4 houses down in the biggest model home Pinewood Estates offers. Our little community of 180 homes, built back in 2018 when everyone thought planned communities were the future of suburban living. What they didn't plan for was giving someone like Cheryl a uniform and a badge. My name's Marcus Hartwell. I'm 58, retired civil engineer who spent 30 years designing municipal infrastructure systems. Water treatment plants, traffic control systems, hydraulic barriers for flood management. I specialized in building things that worked perfectly under pressure. My wife Sarah and I moved here 18 months ago for what was supposed to be a quiet retirement. We picked the corner lot on Maple Drive and Pine Circle specifically for the extra space. Sarah wanted room for her flower garden. The flower bed that Cheryl kept destroying? That was Sarah's last project before the cancer took her. We spent hours together that spring, choosing perennials that would bloom in cycles throughout the year. Daffodils for early spring, followed by tulips, then summer lilies, finishing with chrysanthemums that would carry us into fall. She wanted something beautiful that would last. The smell of fresh mulch still reminds me of her laugh when we got our hands dirty planting those bulbs. Sarah had this theory that gardens were like engineering projects. If you planned the foundation right, everything else would flourish on schedule. Sarah never got to see them bloom, so when Cheryl Brennan decided my memorial garden was her personal shortcut to avoid the traffic light on Pine Circle, she wasn't just trespassing. She was desecrating the last thing my wife and I built together. And she was messing with someone who understood exactly how systems break down when people ignore the rules. The pattern started small. First week of June, I noticed tire tracks cutting across the corner of my lawn. No big deal, I figured. Maybe someone took a wrong turn. But then it happened again. Same tracks, same route, same time every morning. By week 3, I'm standing at my kitchen window with my coffee. That's become my morning ritual since Sarah passed. And I see this white Mercedes come flying around the corner at 6:45 sharp, right through my sprinkler system. The crunch of plastic under her tires became my new alarm clock. The smell of engine oil mixing with crushed flower stems made my morning coffee taste like regret. But here's the kicker. After she demolished my sprinklers and carved fresh ruts through Sarah's garden, Cheryl would slow down just enough to give me this little royal wave through her windshield, like she was doing me a favor. Like I should be grateful for the privilege of having my property destroyed by community royalty. I tried the polite approach first. Knocked on her door that Saturday morning, introduced myself as the new neighbor, mentioned that her morning route was causing some damage to my landscaping. Could she maybe use the actual road? That condescending smile. "Oh, Marcus," she said my name like she was talking to a confused child. "That's just community access. HOA covenant allows for emergency routing. You'll get used to how things work around here." Emergency routing. Through a flower garden. At 6:45 a.m. every day for 2 months. That's when I realized this wasn't about convenience or community access or emergency anything. This was about power. About establishing who runs the neighborhood and who follows orders. Cheryl Brennan had decided I was going to be one of the followers. She picked the wrong engineer. Because while Cheryl thought she was breaking a grieving widower's spirit, She was actually challenging someone who'd spent 3 decades designing systems that could handle any kind of pressure. And when those systems failed, I knew exactly how to rebuild them stronger. Time to show our HOA queen what happens when an unstoppable force meets immovable engineering. After that conversation, Cheryl's morning shortcuts became bolder. She wasn't just cutting across my lawn anymore, she was making a statement. The Mercedes started showing up with friends. Morning dog walkers began using my property as their route to the community park. Delivery drivers discovered they could use my driveway for 3-point turns instead of finding proper space on the street. I even caught some teenager practicing parallel parking maneuvers on my front lawn while his girlfriend filmed it for TikTok. When I asked one of the dog walkers to use the sidewalk, she looked at me like I'd grown a second head. Cheryl said this was fine. She said you don't mind sharing community space. Community space? On my deed. That's when my engineering brain kicked in. See, engineers don't get emotional about problems. We get systematic. So I installed 3 discrete security cameras with different angles covering my property. Started a spreadsheet documenting every violation with timestamps, weather conditions, and damage assessments. Photographed the progressive destruction every single day. The click of my camera documenting each violation became as regular as Cheryl's morning destruction. I kept meticulous records like I was building a case, which it turned out I was. The smell of fresh coffee mixed with the acrid stench of diesel exhaust became my daily reminder that this war was escalating. After 2 weeks of documentation, the numbers were staggering. 43 separate trespassing incidents, $1,400 in sprinkler system damage where plastic heads had been crushed under wheels, $800 worth of sod that would need complete replacement, the kind of deep-root damage that takes months to repair properly. And that didn't include the emotional toll of watching Sarah's memorial garden get churned into a mud pit that smelled like motor oil and defeat. I researched property laws until my eyes burned from staring at legal documents. Back in my municipal engineering days, I'd learned that property disputes usually come down to one thing: who has better documentation. Turns out my lot boundaries extended 12 feet beyond where everyone assumed they ended. The original survey markers had been there all along, just hidden under years of accumulated leaves and overgrowth. I had every legal right to protect that space. More importantly, I remembered from dealing with city contractors that trespassing becomes a pattern of behavior when people think they won't face consequences. The solution was always the same: make the consequences clear and immediate. So I filed formal trespassing complaints with the county sheriff. Installed private property, no trespassing signs along the surveyed boundaries. Sent certified letters to every violator with itemized invoices for damages. Professional documentation, the kind that holds up in court and scares people who think they're above the law. But here's where Cheryl showed her true colors. Instead of acknowledging the law or my property rights, she doubled down with pure fiction. 3 days after my certified letters went out, she produced this elaborate HOA covenant about community emergency routes. Complete fabrication, but printed on official letterhead with fake bylaw references. Claimed my signs violated neighborhood aesthetic standards, even though they were standard white lettering on green backgrounds, exactly like every other property marker in Virginia. Then came the threats. Daily fines for obstructing emergency vehicle access, an emergency board meeting to discuss my uncooperative resident behavior, emergency board meeting, for a property dispute. That required exactly 0 emergency response. The rustle of legal documents spread across my kitchen table became the soundtrack to my evenings. I spent entire nights cross-referencing county codes with HOA bylaws, building an airtight case. Because while Cheryl was playing politics, I was doing what engineers do best: finding the weak points in a faulty system. So I did what any good engineer does when someone hands you fake documentation. I went and found the real paperwork, spent an entire weekend in the county clerk's office reading every single covenant, bylaw, and restriction that governed Pinewood Estates. No emergency access provisions anywhere, nothing about community routing through private property, and certainly nothing giving the HOA president the right to declare someone's front yard a public thoroughfare. But here's what I did find, and this was knowledge that would serve me well. HOA board meetings require 72-hour advance notice to residents under Virginia state law. Emergency meetings can only be called for actual emergencies, natural disasters, gas leaks, or safety hazards that threaten life and property. Any board action taken without proper procedure becomes legally void, regardless of what the minutes say afterward. Cheryl's little kangaroo court to discuss my behavior violated the association's own rules and state law, Every decision they made would be worthless in court. The metallic taste of anger had become familiar during those late-night phone calls with Cheryl, but now it was mixing with something else. The satisfaction of knowing I was dealing with an amateur who thought a title and an attitude were all she needed to run roughshod over people's rights. This wasn't about grass anymore. This was about a bully who'd gotten away with intimidating people for so long, she'd forgotten there were actually rules she had to follow too. And I was about to become her very expensive education in what happens when you pick a fight with someone who knows how to read the fine print and document everything. I decided to fight fire with legal fire, hired a surveyor to mark my exact property boundaries, cost me $650 but worth every penny for the look on Cheryl's face when she saw those stakes. Then I installed the most beautiful wrought iron fence you've ever seen, 3 feet high, decorative scrollwork, met every single HOA aesthetic requirement in the book. My contractor buddy Jake from my old engineering firm knocked it out over a weekend. We made sure every post was perfectly aligned, every measurement exact, the kind of craftsmanship that would make a property value appraiser weep with joy. Jake had worked with me on municipal projects for 15 years, and he understood that sometimes the best engineering solutions are the ones that look too pretty to argue with. Monday morning, 6:45 a.m., I'm at my kitchen window with my coffee. Here comes the white Mercedes, right on schedule. Except this time, Cheryl hits the brakes so hard I could hear her tires squeal from inside my house. The fence blocked her shortcut. Simple physics. She'd have to use the actual road like a normal human being. I savored that moment. The steam rising from my coffee mug while I watched Cheryl sit in her car, staring at the fence like it had personally insulted her family lineage. She tried backing up and approaching from a different angle, as if maybe the fence would move out of respect for her authority. It didn't. By Wednesday, Cheryl had declared my fence a safety violation, claimed it created blind spots for drivers, which was demonstrably false since it was only 3 feet high and you could see a school bus approaching from 3 blocks away. Said it violated some mysterious open community spirit policy that existed nowhere in the actual HOA documents. She rallied her board members with dire warnings about property values. Started a petition against my hostile neighborhood barriers. Even organized a meeting, this time with proper 72-hour notice, to discuss the Marcus problem. The community manipulation was impressive, I'll give her that. She spread word that I'd become antisocial since Sarah's death, implied my grief had made me unstable and dangerous to community harmony, suggested the fence was just the beginning of my transformation into some kind of compound-dwelling hermit. Some of my neighbors actually started crossing the street when they saw me checking the mail. The whispered conversations stopped abruptly when I walked past. Even Mrs. Patterson next door, who used to bring me casseroles after Sarah passed, suddenly found reasons to avoid eye contact. Then came the violation notice, hand-delivered by Cheryl herself, with that same condescending smile that made my jaw clench every time. $12,200 fine for obstructing community transit patterns, claimed my fence violated non-existent emergency access requirements, demanded immediate removal or I'd face escalating daily penalties. If the fines reached $5,000, they'd put a lien on my property. The paperwork was impressive, official HOA letterhead, legal language, reference numbers that looked authentic. But something about it bothered me. In my years working with municipal contracts, I'd learned that legitimate penalties always follow documented procedures. This felt rushed, improvised. So I called the other board members, started with Susan Lennox, the secretary. Susan, I got this fine notice about my fence. Can you walk me through the hearing process? Silence. Then, what hearing? I don't know anything about a fence fine. Same response from Robert Hayes, the treasurer. Neither one had any idea what I was talking about. They'd never voted on my case, never seen evidence of violations, never authorized any fines. Cheryl had essentially forged an official HOA action using her position as president. That's when I remembered something from my municipal days. Most state laws require board majority votes for penalties over $100, and they have to follow their own documented procedures. When I dug deeper into Virginia HOA regulations, Cheryl's $1,200 fine required a formal hearing, evidence presentation, and recorded board vote, none of which had happened. I researched the ownership history of our neighborhood and found something that made my engineer's brain start connecting dots. In the past 3 years, 3 families had voluntarily moved away after extended conflicts with the HOA. All 3 properties were resold through Cheryl's real estate agency. All 3 sold for $15,000 to $20,000 below market value, the kind of discount you see when people are desperate to escape a situation. Cheryl's commission earnings from those forced sales exceeded $25,000. The real estate connection hit me like a cold shower. This wasn't about community standards or property management. This was a business model. Harass property owners until they sell at a loss, then profit from their desperation. Create enough chaos and legal fees that people choose escape over fighting. The smell of rain on concrete outside my window mixed with the bitter taste of realization. I wasn't dealing with an overzealous HOA president. I was dealing with someone running a sophisticated harassment scheme for personal profit. But here's what Cheryl didn't know about engineers. We don't just solve problems. We study the entire system until we find every weak point. And her system had some very interesting vulnerabilities that she was about to discover the hard way. Time to turn this from defense into offense. Because if Cheryl Brennan wanted to play games with fake legal documents and forged board votes, she was about to learn what happens when you pick a fight with someone who actually understands how the law works. Cheryl's response to my fence was like watching a masterclass in petty tyranny. She launched a harassment campaign that would have impressed a military strategist. Daily compliance inspections became my new reality. Cheryl would show up with a clipboard and a camera, searching for violations like a detective hunting for evidence. Grass 1/4 inch over the height limit, citation. Guest parking for more than 4 hours, violation notice. Using my lawnmower during permitted hours on Saturday morning, noise complaint. The financial assault was methodical, $200 daily penalties for my continued fence violation, $150 administrative fees every time I appealed a citation, $500 legal consultation charges when I questioned the board attorney's involvement, even though I'd never spoken to any attorney. After 3 weeks, my HOA fines approached $4,000 for a fence that violated absolutely nothing in the actual covenants. But the social isolation hurt worse than the money. Suddenly, my invitations to neighborhood barbecues disappeared. Cheryl had organized a WhatsApp group for Marcus monitoring updates. Yes, I found out about that from Jake when he overheard his wife talking about it. She encouraged neighbors to report any concerning activities, which apparently included me working in my own garden and having groceries delivered. The smell of paranoia was thick as summer humidity. People crossed the street to avoid conversations. Parents pulled their kids inside when I walked to my mailbox. Cheryl had turned me into the neighborhood boogeyman without ever proving I'd done anything wrong. Then the property sabotage started. I woke up one morning to find my garden hose cut clean through. No security footage. Whoever did it knew exactly where my cameras couldn't see. Next week, my mailbox post was loosened, requiring $80 in repairs. Then my trash bins kept getting accidentally knocked over, spilling garbage across Sarah's memorial garden. The final insult was the herbicide damage. Someone had sprayed weed killer in a perfect line across Sarah's flower bed. The perennials she'd chosen so carefully started browning and dying, one by one. The acrid chemical smell made my eyes water every time I tried to tend what was left of our garden. That's when I installed night vision cameras and started a deeper investigation into HOA finances. Back in my municipal engineering days, I'd worked with enough city budgets to know what financial fraud looks like. Missing receipts, inflated costs, payments to vendors who never show up, it all follows the same patterns. When your HOA collects fees for maintenance and improvements, you have the right to see where that money goes. I requested 3 years of financial records and spent evenings analyzing every expense report. $30,000 in unexplained emergency maintenance. Invoices from contractors I'd never seen working in our community. 3 separate bills for repairing the community pool, which had been resurfaced exactly once in my 18 months here. Emergency tree removal for trees that were still standing healthy in our common areas. The biggest red flag was the vendor addresses. 3 of our largest contractors were registered to the same residential address, which happened to be owned by Cheryl's sister. Classic embezzlement setup. Create fake companies, submit inflated bills, approve your own payments. That's when Margaret Lennox knocked on my door. Margaret used to be the HOA treasurer before she quit 6 months earlier. Quiet lady in her 60s, kept to herself, But she'd been watching my fence situation with growing concern. She had copies of expense reports from 2022 and 2023 that showed a pattern of financial irregularities. "Marcus," she said, sitting at my kitchen table with a manila envelope thick with documents. I should have spoken up sooner, but Cheryl keeps files on every resident. Personal information, financial troubles, marriage problems, she uses it to keep people quiet. The documents Margaret brought were explosive. Invoices for work that was never performed. Payments to companies that existed only on paper. Emergency repairs that cost 3 times the normal rate and were authorized solely by Cheryl without board approval. Contractor licenses that had expired years ago. Insurance certificates that were photocopied fakes. Total questionable expenses, $73,000 over 3 years. I remembered something from my days working with city contracts. Legitimate contractors always have active business licenses, current insurance certificates, and references from multiple previous jobs. When vendors refuse to provide this basic information, or when all the emergency work mysteriously goes to companies owned by board members' relatives, you're not looking at poor management. You're looking at organized theft. Margaret's evidence changed everything. This wasn't just about my fence or my property rights. Cheryl had been systematically stealing from every family in Pinewood Estates while playing community dictator. Every inflated invoice, every fake emergency repair, every no-bid contract to her sister's companies. It was all funded by neighbors who trusted their HOA leadership. But confronting a thief with evidence isn't enough. You need a plan that protects you and stops them permanently. And for that, I was going to need some specialized help and a solution that would make Cheryl's next move her last mistake. The next phase of this war required precision engineering and perfect timing. Time to build something that would turn Cheryl's own arrogance into the trap that finally caught her. Margaret's evidence was just the beginning. When I spread those documents across my dining room table, I wasn't just looking at financial fraud. I was looking at Cheryl's entire criminal operation. $73,000 embezzled through vendor kickbacks. Her sister's companies had received $45,000 for work that was never completed. Cheryl's husband ran a landscaping business that employed exactly nobody, but had billed our community $28,000 for phantom services. The community pool had been resurfaced twice on paper, but only once in reality. But here's where my engineering background paid off. I started researching the legal framework that governs HOAs, and I found something beautiful. Criminal misconduct by board members automatically voids their authority. When HOA officers engage in embezzlement, their directors' and officers' insurance becomes worthless. The original developer covenants that give them power over residents become legally null. Most importantly, any access rights they've claimed disappear the moment they're proven to be criminals. Cheryl thought her position made her untouchable, but theft makes you legally powerless. I contacted David Rodriguez, an attorney who specializes in HOA fraud cases. David explained something crucial that I remembered from my municipal contract work. When board members steal from communities, they become personally liable for all damages. Their homes, their cars, their retirement accounts, everything becomes fair game for lawsuit recovery. The insurance angle was particularly satisfying. Cheryl probably thought the HOA's insurance would protect her from any legal consequences. But insurance policies don't cover criminal activity. The moment she stole that first dollar, she voided every protection her position offered. That's when the hydraulic bollard idea clicked into place. As a civil engineer, I'd worked with retractable barriers for traffic control around construction sites. Modern systems are incredibly sophisticated. They can be triggered remotely, they're powered by renewable energy, and they're completely legal to install on private property for security purposes. The beauty of hydraulic bollards is their dual nature. When lowered, they look like decorative posts marking a driveway entrance. When activated, they become impenetrable steel barriers that can stop a truck going 40 miles per hour. The engineering is elegant, hydraulic pressure distributed through steel cylinders, controlled by electronic systems that respond instantly to remote commands. Cost for a 4-post system with smartphone integration, around $4,000 including installation. Cost of watching someone who's been stealing from your neighborhood get trapped by their own arrogance, absolutely priceless. David helped me understand the legal positioning perfectly. Installing security barriers on private property is not only legal, It's recommended by law enforcement for areas with ongoing trespassing problems. As long as the system has manual overrides and doesn't create genuine imprisonment, it's just sophisticated property protection. I researched the specifications for weeks. Solar-powered hydraulic systems with smartphone control, battery backup to prevent system failures during cloudy weather, emergency manual releases accessible from inside the trapped area. Everything designed to be completely legal while being absolutely effective. The technical specs were impressive. Each bollard could withstand 50,000 pounds of lateral force, rise to full height in 30 seconds, and operate for 6 months on solar power alone. The control system would log every activation with timestamps and GPS coordinates, perfect evidence for any legal proceedings. But the psychological component was equally important. Cheryl's ego demanded public displays of her power. She couldn't resist opportunities to humiliate people in front of witnesses. That personality flaw was going to become her downfall. The power dynamic had completely shifted. Cheryl thought she was dealing with a grieving widower who'd roll over when pressured. Instead, she was facing a civil engineer who'd discovered her crimes and was building a trap with surgical precision. I started planning the installation logistics. Jake would handle the excavation and hydraulic systems during a weekend when Cheryl was out of town. The control equipment would be disguised as landscape lighting fixtures. The whole system would appear to be a simple driveway upgrade until the moment it was needed. Time to move from defense to offense. But first, I needed to assemble a team that could coordinate the legal, technical, and community aspects of what was about to become Cheryl Brennan's very expensive final lesson in property rights. David Rodriguez became my legal quarterback, coordinating a multi-pronged attack that would have made a military strategist proud. First move, bring in Sarah Kim, a forensic accountant who specialized in unraveling financial fraud. Sarah had worked cases from church embezzlement to municipal corruption, and she recognized Cheryl's patterns immediately. This is textbook HOA theft, Sarah explained during our first meeting at David's office. Create fake emergencies, inflate repair costs, route payments through family businesses. The only unusual thing is how sloppy she's been with the documentation. Sarah's investigation made Margaret's evidence look like amateur hour. She traced electronic transfers, cross-referenced bank records, and documented a systematic embezzlement operation that had been running for 4 years. The total theft exceeded $95,000 when you included fake invoices for community amenities that were never delivered. Jake Martinez, my contractor friend, handled the technical installation with the precision we'd learned working on municipal projects together. We designed the Bollards system as a driveway security upgrade, 4 decorative posts along my driveway entrance that could rise 4 feet in 30 seconds. The engineering was beautiful. Solar-powered hydraulic cylinders buried 18 inches underground, connected by PVC conduits that looked like standard irrigation lines. Battery backup system disguised as landscape lighting fixtures. Control panel hidden inside a fake electrical meter box. To any casual observer, it looked like I'd installed attractive driveway markers with subtle LED accent lighting. Jake understood the importance of redundancy from our construction days. Marcus, if we're doing this, we're doing it right. Triple backup power, manual override accessible from 3 different locations, and diagnostic systems that log every operation. The smartphone app was surprisingly intuitive, 4 buttons corresponding to each bollard, with options for individual or simultaneous activation. GPS integration that would only allow operation from within a 100-foot radius, preventing accidental triggers from inside the house. Margaret became our community coordinator, quietly building support among neighbors who'd been intimidated into silence for too long. We went house to house sharing financial evidence, showing families exactly how much they'd been overcharged in fees. The mathematics were damning. Average household overpayment of $2,200 over 3 years. Fake emergency assessments that should have been covered by regular fees. Contractor work billed at triple the market rate for jobs that were never completed properly. 23 families signed a petition demanding complete financial audits and emergency board removal. 3 current board members, Susan Lennox, Robert Hayes, and Jennifer Walsh, quietly resigned rather than face association with Cheryl's crimes. They'd never been active participants, just intimidated into rubber-stamping her decisions. David coordinated with the law enforcement agencies preparing criminal referrals for embezzlement, mail fraud, and tax evasion. The insurance fraud report went to the state attorney general. Civil lawsuits were drafted for property damage, emotional distress, and fraudulent misrepresentation. But the psychological component required the most careful planning. I needed Cheryl to believe she'd won completely before springing the trap. So I started playing the defeated homeowner with Academy Award-worthy performance. I removed my fence voluntarily, telling neighbors I couldn't afford the legal fees anymore, mentioned family pressure to sell and move closer to my children in North Carolina. Let slip comments about retirement savings being wiped out by legal costs and feeling overwhelmed by the whole situation. The performance was Oscar-worthy. I let word spread that I was financially exhausted, emotionally broken, and ready to surrender. Cheryl ate it up like honey, telling anyone who'd listen that she'd taught Marcus Hartwell about community cooperation and restored proper neighborhood order. Meanwhile, I was running final tests on the Bollards system every night after dark. The hydraulic motors were whisper quiet, rising and lowering with mechanical precision. Jake had installed pressure sensors that would detect attempts to drive over lowered posts, automatically raising them if anyone tried to force entry. David arranged media contacts through his network of investigative reporters who specialized in local government corruption. Channel 7's Consumer Protection Unit was particularly interested in HOA fraud stories. The Sheriff's Department received briefings about potential trespassing violations and civil disturbances. Sarah prepared evidence packages for multiple agencies: FBI Financial Crimes Unit, State Attorney General, Local District Attorney, and Civil Court. Every document was authenticated, every financial transaction traced, every fraudulent invoice cross-referenced with legitimate contractor databases. The trap was elegant in its simplicity. Legal property protection backed by overwhelming criminal evidence coordinated with media coverage and law enforcement response. All triggered by a target whose ego would demand she make her victory as public and humiliating as possible. Margaret's intelligence network confirmed that Cheryl was planning something special for my surrender. A community healing event that would demonstrate her leadership and authority. She wanted witnesses for her final victory over the difficult resident who'd dared to challenge her power. Perfect. Because what Cheryl didn't understand was that engineers build systems designed to handle exactly the kind of pressure she was about to apply. And when those systems activate, they don't just solve the immediate problem, they eliminate it permanently. The remote control felt solid in my hand during those final tests. 4 buttons controlling 4 steel posts. Perfect engineering for imperfect justice. All I needed was for Cheryl's arrogance to drive her straight into my driveway for one final demonstration of her authority. Time to see if the mouse would take the cheese. Cheryl's victory lap was everything I'd hoped for and more. She scheduled what she called a community compliance celebration for the Saturday after I removed my fence, invited supporters to witness the restoration of neighborhood harmony, even hired a professional photographer to document her triumph over the difficult resident. Word spread through our neighborhood network that Cheryl was planning social media posts about effective leadership and standing up to antisocial behavior. She was going to turn my surrender into her campaign platform for something bigger, maybe city council or county commissioner. The woman's ego knew no bounds. The setup deepened when I ran into Janet Morrison at the grocery store. Janet lived next door to Cheryl and had become her unofficial intelligence gatherer. I made sure to mention my family's pressure to sell and move closer to my grandchildren in Arizona. The legal fees just exhausted my savings, I told Janet, making sure I sounded defeated and resigned. Sarah always said life's too short to fight battles you can't win. Maybe it's time to listen to her wisdom. I could see Janet practically salivating at this intelligence. By Thursday, everyone in Pinewood Estates knew Marcus Hartwell was beaten and planning his exit. But while I was playing broken widower, my engineering brain was documenting Cheryl's escalating boldness. She authorized $8,000 in emergency tree removal using her sister's crew, healthy oak trees that posed no threat to anyone. No board vote, no resident notification, money transferred the same day to family business accounts. The pattern was accelerating. Success breeds arrogance, and arrogance breeds mistakes. Cheryl was getting sloppy, authorizing bigger thefts because she thought I was too broken to investigate further. Thursday evening, Margaret called with intelligence that made my pulse quicken. Marcus, Cheryl's planning something big for Saturday. She's invited board members, supporters, even some city council candidates she wants to impress. She's calling it a leadership demonstration. Friday afternoon, Cheryl knocked on my door with an invitation that made my heart race. She wanted to hold her neighborhood improvement meeting on Saturday morning in my front yard, said it would be symbolic of community healing and cooperation. "Marcus," she said with that patronizing smile I'd grown to despise, "this is your chance to show everyone that you understand how things work around here. We can put this whole unpleasantness behind us and move forward as a stronger community." I agreed immediately, with just the right amount of grateful relief. "I appreciate the opportunity to make things right, Cheryl. I know I've been difficult since Sarah passed." Then came the perfect bait. I mentioned I'd be visiting my sister in Richmond that weekend, but she was welcome to use the space. Even offered to leave the gate unlocked so people could park in my driveway if needed. "That's very generous," Cheryl said, and I could see the wheels turning. Free access to my property during my absence, the opportunity to demonstrate her complete control over the problem resident's space. Her ego couldn't resist. The invitation was perfect psychological manipulation. Cheryl's narcissism demanded witnesses for her victory, and now she had permission to bring her entire support network onto my private property for maximum humiliation theater. Margaret's intelligence network, a group of neighbors who'd grown tired of Cheryl's bullying, confirmed the guest list: 6 HOA supporters, 2 remaining board members, Cheryl's photographer, and the contractor crew to assess future community improvements. They planned to turn my surrender into a multimedia celebration of authoritarian victory. What they didn't know was that David Rodriguez had positioned unmarked vehicles with video equipment around the neighborhood. The sheriff's department had been briefed on potential trespassing violations and civil disturbances. Local media contacts were standing by for what David promised would be a significant community interest story. The Bollards system passed final testing Friday night. Each post rose smoothly from its housing, locked into position with satisfying mechanical precision, then retracted just as smoothly. The solar batteries were fully charged, backup power systems tested and ready. Emergency manual overrides accessible but hidden from casual discovery. I practiced the remote control sequence until I could activate it with my eyes closed. 4 buttons in a specific pattern that would raise all posts simultaneously. GPS confirmation required to prevent accidental activation. System diagnostics logging every operation with timestamps and location data. Saturday morning would bring multiple vehicles onto my private driveway, multiple witnesses to document their trespassing, and multiple cameras to record what happened when Cheryl Brennan discovered that hydraulic engineering trumps HOA politics. The chess pieces were positioned perfectly. The queen was about to walk into checkmate, and she was bringing her entire court to witness her downfall. Saturday morning, 9:15 a.m., Cheryl's victory parade arrived exactly on schedule, and I watched from my hidden observation point behind the Johnson's hedge next door. The white Mercedes led a convoy of 4 vehicles up my driveway like some kind of royal procession. Cheryl was driving, of course, with 2 remaining board members following behind in their SUVs. The contractor truck brought up the rear, loaded with equipment for what Cheryl was calling property assessment and community improvement planning. From my position with binoculars, I watched as Cheryl positioned her Mercedes at the deepest part of my driveway. Classic dominance display. She wanted to park where everyone could see her, claiming the space that had caused our entire conflict. The irony was perfect. She was voluntarily driving into the exact trap I'd built for her. The other vehicles followed her lead, spreading out across my driveway like they owned it. Board member Susan Lennox, who'd apparently unresigned for this special event, parked her Lexus Crossways behind Cheryl. Robert Hayes blocked the driveway exit with his pickup truck. The contractor vehicle backed in close to the house, ostensibly for easy equipment access. All 4 vehicles were now completely inside my driveway boundaries, exactly where I needed them. Cheryl stepped out wearing what I can only describe as a victory outfit: white blazer, pearls, that smile reserved for moments when she thought she'd crush someone's spirit completely. She directed her photographer to capture before shots of the property, already planning the narrative of community restoration and effective leadership. The neighbors started gathering. 6 families who'd been pressured into supporting Cheryl's crusade against the antisocial widower. A few curious onlookers drawn by the unusual morning activity. Even some kids on bicycles, attracted by the crowd and the promise of free entertainment. "Ladies and gentlemen," Cheryl announced loudly enough for everyone to hear, "today marks a new beginning for our community. When residents work with HOA leadership instead of fighting against it, everyone benefits." That's when I triggered the Bollards. The hydraulic system activated silently, just a soft mechanical hum that nobody noticed over the conversation and morning bird songs. 4 steel posts rose from hidden housings along my driveway entrance, extending to their full 4-foot height in 30 seconds of mechanical precision. The posts locked into position with a barely audible click that sounded like justice being served. At first, nobody noticed. Cheryl was busy directing her photo shoot, positioning board members around the space where my fence used to be. The contractor was unloading equipment, making a show of professional assessment for the cameras. Then Robert Hayes tried to leave early. Apparently he had a golf game at 10. His pickup truck approached the driveway exit and stopped abruptly. I could see his confusion through the windshield as he processed the steel barriers that definitely hadn't been there when he arrived 15 minutes earlier. He honked his horn twice, the universal signal for, "What the hell is this?" That's when everyone turned around and saw the bollards. 4 steel sentinels blocking the only exit from my driveway, trapping 4 vehicles and 8 adults in my personal parking lot. The initial reaction was pure confusion. Cheryl approached the bollards like they might disappear if she stared hard enough. Robert got out of his truck and tried to manually push down the posts, impossible against hydraulic pressure that could stop a freight truck. Susan Lennox started taking pictures with her phone, probably for evidence in whatever lawsuit she was already planning. The contractor pulled out his phone too, but I suspected he was calling for backup equipment to remove what he assumed was a malfunction. The gathered neighbors were murmuring among themselves, phones appearing as people started recording what was clearly becoming an unusual situation. That's when I made my entrance. "Good morning, everyone," I called out cheerfully, walking up from the street like I'd just returned from a pleasant Saturday stroll. "What brings you all to my driveway this beautiful morning?" Cheryl's face went through several colors I didn't know human skin could achieve. "Marcus, what is this? How do we get out?" I examined the bollards with theatrical concern, walking around them like a confused homeowner encountering mysterious equipment. "Oh my, that's my new security system. Must have activated automatically when multiple vehicles entered the driveway. Motion sensors, you know. Technology these days is so sensitive." The lie was perfect because it contained enough truth to sound plausible. The system was automatic, just controlled remotely rather than by motion sensors. "Well, turn it off," Cheryl demanded, her voice rising toward hysteria. "We have legitimate business to conduct here." "I'm afraid that's the problem," I said with genuine regret. "You see, you're all trespassing on private property. The system won't deactivate while unauthorized vehicles are present. Safety feature to prevent exactly this kind of situation." That's when Deputy Martinez arrived. David's coordination working perfectly. He'd driven by on routine patrol and noticed the unusual gathering and agitated voices. "Everything okay here, folks?" the deputy asked, approaching the trapped vehicles with professional interest. But the real fireworks were just beginning. Margaret Lennox arrived like clockwork, carrying a manila envelope thick enough to choke a horse. Behind her came David Rodriguez with 2 people I didn't recognize, federal agents with badges and very serious expressions that made the morning air feel suddenly electric. "Cheryl," Margaret announced loudly enough for everyone to hear, including the growing crowd of neighbors and the contractor's crew, "I think it's time we discussed where our community's money really went." She started distributing photocopied documents to the gathered crowd, bank statements showing unauthorized transfers, invoices for work that was never performed, contracts with companies that existed only on paper, registered to addresses owned by Cheryl's family members. $95,000, Margaret said, her voice carrying across the driveway and beyond to neighbors who'd gathered on the street. "Stolen from every family in Pinewood Estates over 4 years. While you were fining Marcus for protecting his wife's memorial garden, you were stealing our children's playground money." The federal agent stepped forward with the kind of professional authority that makes crowds go quiet. "Mrs. Brennan, I'm Agent Williams with the Financial Crimes Task Force. We'd like to ask you some questions about HOA financial management and vendor relationships." Cheryl's photographer, bless his professional instincts, kept shooting. But now instead of victory photos documenting community leadership, he was capturing a federal investigation in real time. The irony was beautiful. Cheryl's own documentation of her triumph was becoming evidence of her downfall. Local news vans started arriving with the timing David had orchestrated perfectly. Channel 7's investigative reporter was setting up for a live broadcast while Channel 12's crew captured aerial footage of the trapped vehicles. The helicopters circling overhead added a surreal quality to what had started as a neighborhood HOA meeting. The crowd dynamics shifted like a breaking dam. Neighbors who'd been intimidated into silence for months suddenly found their voices. Families started calculating how much they'd been overcharged in fees. Parents realized their playground fund had been stolen while they'd been told there wasn't enough money for community improvements. Every family paid an extra $2,200 over 4 years, Margaret continued, waving the financial documents that Sarah Kim had helped authenticate. While Cheryl threatened Marcus with fines for protecting his property, she was stealing money meant for our sidewalk repairs, our community center maintenance, our holiday decorations. Susan Lennox, one of the trapped board members, suddenly developed amnesia about her support for Cheryl's leadership. "I never authorized those payments," she announced to anyone who'd listen, including the federal agents taking notes. "I never even saw half those invoices. Cheryl said board approval wasn't needed for emergency expenditures." The crowd pressed closer to the Bollards, but now they weren't trying to help Cheryl escape. They were making sure she couldn't leave until they got answers to 4 years of questions about missing money and inflated fees. That's when Channel 7's reporter Jennifer Walsh pushed her microphone toward me. "Mr. Hartwell, how does it feel to finally have justice for the harassment you've endured?" I looked at the 4 trapped vehicles, then at Cheryl's face, which had gone from angry red to defeated gray. The remote control felt warm in my pocket. 4 years of planning and 6 months of harassment coming down to this single moment of perfect engineering justice. "For months, Cheryl Brennan treated my property like her personal highway," I said, speaking directly to the camera while the crowd went silent. "She destroyed my late wife's memorial garden while stealing money from every family in this community. Today she learned that bullying widowers has consequences and that hydraulic engineering is more reliable than HOA politics." The crowd erupted in applause that echoed off the surrounding houses like thunder. Car horns honked in support from neighbors watching from their driveways. Kids on bicycles cheered like it was the 4th of July and New Year's Eve combined. Agent Williams approached the Bollards with professional interest, examining the engineering with obvious appreciation. "Mr. Hartwell, this is quite a system. How do we resolve the vehicle situation so we can continue our investigation?" I pulled out the remote control, a simple black device about the size of a garage door opener that represented months of planning and thousands of dollars in engineering. "Mrs. Brennan, I'll lower these bollards the moment you publicly resign as HOA president and agree to full restitution for what you've stolen from our community." Cheryl looked around at the federal agents, the news cameras, the angry neighbors, and the documents proving her crimes. Her empire of petty tyranny was collapsing in real time on local television, and everyone could see the exact moment she realized her game was over. "This is entrapment," she said weakly, her voice barely carrying over the crowd noise. "You can't force me to resign under these conditions." Agent Williams cleared his throat with the authority of federal law enforcement. "Ma'am, financial crimes are federal offenses regardless of HOA politics. Your cooperation with restitution might be viewed favorably during sentencing, but that's a conversation for your attorney and the U.S. Attorney's Office." The news helicopter circled overhead, while social media exploded with live streams of the confrontation. Had HOA justice started trending locally as neighbors shared the story of hydraulic revenge and financial crime exposure. Finally, faced with federal charges, media exposure, and community outrage that was growing louder by the minute, Cheryl cracked. "Fine," she said, her voice barely audible over the crowd noise and helicopter rotors. "I resign as HOA president effective immediately. I'll work with my attorney on financial resolution." I pressed the button. The Bollards retracted into their housings with a satisfying hydraulic hiss that sounded like justice being served with precision engineering. 4 expensive vehicles were finally free to leave my driveway, but Cheryl Brennan's troubles were just beginning. 6 months later, Cheryl Brennan was serving 24 months in federal prison for embezzlement, mail fraud, and tax evasion. Her real estate license was permanently revoked by the state board. The courts ordered $120,000 in restitution, the stolen money plus interest, penalties, and punitive damages that would follow her for years. Asset seizure recovered most of the funds through a process that was as methodical as it was satisfying. Cheryl's Mercedes went up for auction, along with her vacation home in Virginia Beach and her husband's construction equipment. Every family in Pinewood Estates received refund checks averaging $400, plus interest calculated from the dates of the original thefts. My settlement for property damage, legal fees, and emotional distress came to $18,000, enough to restore Sarah's memorial garden with improvements she would have loved. I installed a beautiful stone border with her name engraved in granite, surrounded by the perennials she'd chosen. They bloomed exactly as she'd planned, cycling through colors from spring to fall in a display that drew visitors from across the neighborhood. The new HOA board implemented transparency reforms that would have made government accountability advocates weep with joy. All financial records posted online monthly with detailed expense breakdowns. Multiple bid requirements for any expenditure over $500. Board meetings live-streamed with full recording archives available to every resident. Annual independent audits mandatory, conducted by firms with no previous relationship to board members. Margaret Lennox was elected our new HOA president unanimously. Her first act was commissioning a plaque for the community garden we funded with recovered embezzlement money, dedicated to honest leadership and the power of neighbors supporting neighbors. I channeled my legal victory into something Sarah would have treasured, the Sarah Hartwell Memorial Scholarship for engineering students at the local community college. The fund grows every year through donations from neighbors who understand that education is the best defense against future corruption. We've helped 12 students so far, and watching them graduate reminds me that some victories create lasting change. The Bollards system remains installed and fully functional. It's featured in my property insurance policy as a legitimate security improvement that actually reduced my premiums. Home Security Magazine ran a feature article about creative solutions for persistent trespassing problems. And I get emails weekly from people dealing with similar harassment asking for installation advice. For anyone facing HOA abuse, here's what I learned. Hydraulic bollards cost between $3,000 and $8,000 depending on features, but they provide permanent access control that's completely legal when properly installed on private property. More importantly, they send a message that some people won't be bullied, no matter how official the bully's position might seem. The community garden project became our neighborhood's pride and joy. Kids play on new playground equipment funded by recovered theft money, while parents tend vegetables in raised beds where Cheryl once planned fake landscaping projects. The sound of children's laughter mixing with sprinkler systems watering restored lawns has replaced the morning crunch of tires destroying property. Property values in Pinewood Estates increased 18% after the corruption cleanup, attracting new families who specifically chose our community because of the reformed HOA governance. We've become a model for ethical neighborhood management that other communities study and replicate. The story inspired legislation too. Virginia passed the HOA Transparency Act, requiring financial disclosure and independent audits for all homeowner associations. 3 neighboring communities discovered their own corruption problems and cleaned house before federal investigators had to get involved. I still have coffee at my kitchen window every morning, but now I'm watching kids ride bicycles safely on actual sidewalks instead of watching my property get destroyed by entitled adults. The smell of fresh mulch in Sarah's memorial garden reminds me that some battles are worth fighting, especially when you have the engineering skills to win them decisively. Last month, my daughter visited from Seattle and brought her kids to see their grandmother's garden. Watching my grandchildren play among the flowers Sarah planted while bollards stood guard like steel sentinels reminded me why some fights are worth winning. Their laughter echoed across the same space where Cheryl once tried to break my spirit, and I knew Sarah would be proud of how the story ended. The remote control sits in my kitchen drawer now, rarely needed but always ready. It's a simple device that represents something profound: the power of preparation, precision engineering, and refusing to let bullies win through intimidation and theft. Sometimes the best defense against petty tyrants is indeed a good offense, and maybe a little hydraulic engineering expertise applied with surgical precision. Your turn, neighbors. What's your craziest HOA horror story? Drop a comment below and let's see who's got the wildest tales of community association chaos. Have you dealt with corrupt board members, selective enforcement, or financial shenanigans in your neighborhood? Share your experiences and maybe we can help each other find solutions. And if this story inspired you to stand up to the bullies in your own life, whether they wear HOA badges or any other uniform of unearned authority, hit that subscribe button, because I've got more tales of sweet justice and creative problem solving coming your way. Sometimes David really does beat Goliath, especially when David has engineering training, a really good lawyer, and a remote control that operates hydraulic justice.